Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Wilkins, Reverb COO, and I have Janet Cho, one of our senior people ops consultants with Reverb, joining us today to share more about compensation and setting up your structure at this early stage.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thanks for joining. What is a critical piece of it, or what critical pieces of advice would you give to a startup leader as they set up their compensation plan?
I'd say the number one thing I would tell them is be flexible. What you design today is not going to be potentially what it looks like when you're 100 employees, 1,000. Just be willing to evolve it as you progress. Another tip I give them is try to be consistent across functions in terms of, for example, universal levels across the company versus having functions have their own levels, and then it becomes unwieldy as you grow. You could change it, but it still becomes hard to undo certain things as you evolve. The other thing I would say is try tying compensation to your values and the culture that you want to espouse within the company, because it's a great way to just reinforce the behaviors you want to see and make sure people are not demonstrating behavior you don't want to see.
Great tips. What do you see startups miss the most when setting up their pay and total rewards plans?
I think what I see is, or what I have seen in the past is that they don't make data-driven decisions, which is kind of funny because sometimes a lot of these startups I support are in high tech, and they pride themselves on using data-driven data to make decisions. But I would really recommend purchasing a third-party benchmarking survey from a reputable source.
That's great. And speaking of, the reputable source, what would you recommend at this stage and size of company?
I'm a big fan, and I'm not being paid, nor is Reverb for this recommendation, but I'm a big fan of Option Impact. The one caveat is you need to be a venture capital based backed firm in order to have access. But if most startups are, but I'm a big fan because you get over 2,000 other companies participating, all sorts of startups. You can filter on the round of funding you're at by revenue, number of employees, state within the country. So it's very, very nimble, and you can do it by job. So I'm a big fan of it. I'm not a big fan of user-generated compensation surveys because the data is not necessarily accurate. So that's my tip on what type of surveys to use.
That's great. Thank you. What are a couple of key questions you always ask leaders in regards to pay?
The first one is, who are your business competitors? Not who you're competing with against for talent, because that may be a different question, but in terms of who are your business competitors, so that we can do some intelligence and due diligence on those companies. The other one is, how competitive do you want to be in the marketplace for candidates? Because that'll dictate, okay, well, who will you benchmark against in terms of setting your pay strategy?
That's great. And then finally, what are a couple things you like to tell leaders to avoid or, not do when doing this work?
This is the one I say all the time is if you're in the high tech industry, competing against the large public high revenue tech companies is a no-win situation if you're trying to compete against them in terms of compensation. You're better off competing in terms of the impact, the scope of role, getting in on the ground floor. That is your leverage versus trying to throw money at candidates, because you will not be able to sustain that as a startup.
That's a great piece of advice. All of it was great. Thank you, Janet, so much for sharing your knowledge of and experience in this space, having supported many, many clients over the last several years. Thank you.
Happy to help.
Bye.